Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
We desire immortality. We like to think that death isn't the end for us. As we observe and experience the death of our loved ones, one of our most cherished hopes is that indeed the bonds of love that we've established with them are really not broken by that specter of death.
Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of the resurrection, the key to Christian faith. Here's Father Bacik.
Well, the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the key to the whole Christian understanding of life. The resurrection is the reason why we call the Christianity the good news. Paul told us that if indeed Jesus was not raised to life, that we are the most foolish of people. It really sets the stage for our whole perception of life. The whole New Testament is written in the light of the resurrection. It's what inspired the early disciples, the fact that Jesus had been raised to life. It is the way they perceive his whole life, all of his teachings, and so on. And I think that it's important to try to look at the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the light of our own hopes and longings. Because surely one of the important things about us humans is that we desire immortality. We like to think that death isn't the end for us. As we observe and experience the death of our loved ones, one of our most cherished hopes is that indeed the bonds of love that we've established with them are really not broken by that specter of death, by the grim reaper that comes to get our loved ones. So our fondest hope and our deepest longing really is for a life that is imperishable, for a richer and better kind of life. And what the resurrection of Jesus says is that we can dare to hope that that is true, that indeed what we want desperately to be the case is the case, that Jesus Christ is indeed been raised to life, that he continues in a glorified existence, that he's gone ahead of us to prepare a place for us, that he's the firstborn of all of those who are to be saved. So in all these ways, the belief in the resurrection is the cornerstone of Christian faith. It all rests on that. And indeed, if that falls, then the whole of the Christian outlook is down the drain. Now, we probably need to look at that resurrection of Jesus in the light of his whole story, of his whole history. We remember that Jesus came preaching the kingdom and calling people to repentance. He believed that the reign of God was at hand. And as time went on, his followers began to believe that indeed he embodied that kingdom, that Jesus didn't just preach the kingdom, but that he personally established it, that this reign of justice and peace was tightly bound up with the person of Jesus of Nazareth, that he was, in his own claim, the absolute Savior, the bringer of the kingdom, the final prophet who announced that the kingdom was here and would be completed. And so when Jesus then went along in his preaching and incurred certain setbacks, apparently, in Galilee, and the whole mission wasn't going well, Luke portrays him at that point as setting his face to Jerusalem, of deciding very freely to go to the capital city, very cognizant of the fact that he could well meet death there, because the establishment within his own Jewish world saw him as a blasphemer, as a heretic, as one who was a false prophet, and at least they, in their own scriptures, had warrant for stoning him to death in the book of Deuteronomy for this kind of false claim. He also knew that he may well incur the wrath of the Roman occupying power if he went to the capital city. And his disciples apparently didn't want him to go. The disciples thought it was better if he did not go to Jerusalem because it was not safe there. But Jesus sets his face on Jerusalem, heads into the capital city, apparently seeing that as an important part of his mission, as being responsive to the will of his Father. And so Jesus goes there, and knowing full well of the dangers that lurk there for him. And surely enough, he was taken by the religious authorities, apparently tried, and at least in sort of a grand jury kind of trial, and the Jewish leaders could not get the vote for a conviction, but then decide to hand him over to Pilate. And as we know, he was executed by the Roman authorities as a political revolutionary, as a threat to the state, and so he is crucified publicly in order to give an example to other would-be revolutionaries. And at that point, we follow the psychology of the disciples. One of the clear things from the Scriptures is that they deserted him. I mean, we don't know exactly how all of that happened, but it appears clear that they were not faithful to the Master to the last moment, that they were not at the cross. They did not stand up with him when they should have. And as a result of his death, the disciples were totally dispirited. They felt that the whole cause was down the drain. This one that they had thought was the Messiah evidently was not. And we might contrast the death of Jesus and the dispirited feeling of the disciples with the death of other great people and what happens. For example, in our own time, when Martin Luther King died, there was horrible grief and outpouring of rage in some circles. But the usual message was something: the ideals of Dr. King will live on. We will continue to fight for that cause. That cause is still alive, and we will engage ourselves in an effort to work for social justice as he did in a nonviolent way. That was the reaction of many people to the death of Martin Luther King, the same reaction we've had to the death of other great people throughout history, such as Socrates, so on. But when Jesus died, it was different. When Jesus died, people were not around saying, yes, we'll carry on the cause and we'll continue with his ideals. They didn't work like that. They were dispirited. Their whole feeling was, it's down the drain. It's all over. We were misguided. We were deluded. He was not what we thought he was. And I think the reason for that is that the people identified the coming of the kingdom, the establishment of peace and justice, with the person of Jesus. In their own mind, those two were so tightly bound together that if Jesus went down, if he failed apparently in his mission, then the whole cause was lost. And so here we have this group of dispirited followers of Jesus. And what happens is, very shortly after, in a sudden, surprising, unexplainable kind of reversal, these disciples are now inspirited. Now they're all excited about this. Now they want to tell the world about what has happened. They get up and preach, and they're so excited about it. Peter is giving that first sermon as it's recorded in Acts, and the people think that he's drunk. They think that all the disciples are somehow high on alcohol here. And Peter has to tell them, no, we're not drunk. What is happening is the prophecy of Joel is fulfilled, that the Spirit is being poured out. It's too early in the morning to be drunk, he tells the people, in a very earthy kind of comment. What is really happening is that we are filled with the Holy Spirit. And we're here to tell you the crucial message. This Jesus, whom you have crucified, has been raised to life. The Father has cared for him, has brought him back to life, and we are the witnesses to that. And now we call upon you to repent and change your lives and be baptized into this community of the followers of Jesus. So this is quite a remarkable occurrence. This is what we really know happened historically. There is no doubt that then in the first century of our era, we had this group of people who were utterly convinced that Jesus, who was nailed to the cross and suffered a terrible death, was still alive, that he was in their midst, that he continued to interact with them, that he was the risen Lord for them. They were so convinced of that they went out and preached it. They tried to get other disciples to follow their way. And eventually many of these people were willing to die for this fact. There was a community of Christians, we know in that first century, who were indeed willing to be martyrs for the cause, who were so convinced of one essential, clear fact for them: Jesus of Nazareth was still alive, was in their midst, had brought them the truth, and they were going to witness to that no matter what. Now this is historical kind of fact. This is something that can be verified. We have in Tacitus the notion that this Christus died under Pontius Pilate. That's recorded in secular history in that one line from Tacitus. And it's also clear from Roman history that the persecutions took place of this Christian sect in that first century. Isn't it Pliny the Younger, if I have that straight in my mind, and it's a little vague at the moment, who writes about the group of Christians who are this followers of this certain Christus. So the records are clear on all of this. Now, as we look at that, again, I think we can only see it in the light of our own hopes, our own longings. The way to read that story, I think, of the resurrection of Jesus is not in a dispassionate kind of way, but as an inquirer after the truth, as one who is seeking the key to life, one who is passionate about trying to understand who we are and how we relate to the mystery that surrounds us, as people who are interested in probing the question of whether indeed the deepest longings of our heart for immortality, for a life imperishable, are ever going to be fulfilled or not. And the key message then of the Christian Scriptures and what the story of Jesus says is a resounding yes to that question, that there is life, that death cannot destroy the bonds of death cannot destroy the bonds of love that have united us with other people, that there is reward for all of the effort we have put into life. And so I think that is what the message of Christianity is all about. That's what the resurrection tells us. That's the way to begin to approach the question and to look for the meaning of the resurrection. Now, I think that perhaps we need to look more closely again as how we would say that in other terms. The resurrection of Jesus is nothing to do with the resuscitation of a body, the way many people think about it. That's not what it's all about, as though they killed Jesus and then he came back and was walking the streets of Jerusalem and people said, "Aha, what are you doing here? I thought you died yesterday." Oh, that the body was brought back to life. It really has very little to do with that. That's not the meaning of the meaning of the resurrection of Jesus is that indeed his claim has been vindicated. The claim to be the bringer of the kingdom, the inaugurator of the reign of God, the final prophet, has been vindicated. That he is proven not to be a man who was disillusioned, not some sort of a deranged person, and not a liar, but one who indeed was what he claimed to be. That is, the final prophet, the one who knew the secrets of the Father. So resurrection means that that claim is vindicated. Another way of saying it might be that it validates what his teaching. It says that he was right about life, that it is proper to live in union with the Father. It's proper to try to be responsive to the call of the higher power which echoes in our own conscience, that it's right to try to be a person of love,
that's the way to live human existence, is to try to reach out to others, to be sensitive, to have a cause greater than ourselves that we're willing in some way to die for. That is a validation of that message. And indeed, resurrection says that Jesus was right, that he does know the secret to living and the way to find happiness in life. Another way of saying it maybe is that the resurrection is the approval of God, of the Father. You notice the characteristic phrase in the New Testament is not that Jesus rose from the dead, although we do get strains of that, but more typically that the Father has raised the man Jesus to life. The resurrection is seen as the activity of the Father, of one who looks down upon the obedient sacrifice of the Son and fills his Son with a new and richer life. The Father is the one who brings Jesus into the glorified existence. It's the initiative of the Father, the activity of the one that we call our God. And so what is it saying? I approve of what you have done. I'm with you in this. What it shows us, I suppose, in still another way, is that the claim of Jesus that we are loved unconditionally is absolutely true. That the Father is one who never deserts his people, that he will come to people's rescue. He will finally make sure the good wins out over the evil. That the great mystery of life is trustworthy. And so in all those different ways is an attempt to say what the resurrection really means. Not so much the resuscitation of a body and not sort of a neutral observation on this Jesus of Nazareth, but within sort of a passionate inquiry, a search for what is true about life. What resurrection says is that life can be trusted, that indeed the mystery that surrounds us is benign, that Jesus had the key to life, and it is safe to follow him, because if we follow him and take up our cross and go in the direction that he went in, that indeed it will be all right with us humans, that it will prove to be a wise course of action. Now, how are we to understand that early experience of the disciples? We really are not told that in the New Testament. It really is not clear exactly what happened to Jesus, nor exactly what caused this transformation of the disciples. And so then what happens is the biblical scholars and the theologians try to find some ways of understanding what has happened here. Not that that's crucial to our faith, but I think it is instructive so that our faith is a more enlightened one. And one of the interesting explanations of this is that what has happened to the disciples can be looked at on the model of a conversion experience. This is the theory put forth by Edward Skillebeck in his great books, Jesus, and the other large volume entitled Christ. It's a theory that is not accepted by everyone, but I find to be an interesting one. And that is that the way to look at the disciples' experience is on the model of a conversion. That what has happened is that these dispirited people have been converted, turned around, changed in their whole outlook by the workings of God in their own life. That indeed they have encountered the risen Lord as an objective kind of fact in their existence, and this has subjectively changed them. They now see the world in a totally different way. They've done, as some people say today, a 180. They've turned around completely and now look at their life and their relationship to Jesus in a totally different way. And one could imagine a certain psychology here that part of what enables them to undergo this conversion experience is their whole previous experience with Jesus, of seeing him as a reconciling kind of person, of seeing him as recalling their table fellowship with him, of the times when they were with Jesus and they had the meal together, and especially that final meal when he did tell them that he was giving himself up for them. That all of those previous experiences of Jesus as being sensitive and kind and forgiving are an enabling part of this conversion, that they are what enable them in a way to experience the risen Lord and to believe that, to ingest it, and to bring it into their own hearts. No, it's interesting that perhaps Peter was a key person in all of that, and perhaps Mary Magdalene. It's interesting how they keep coming up in these appearance accounts, and perhaps, and again, speculation from a theological perspective, that perhaps Peter, who was put in such a bad light, especially in Mark's gospel, as being the one who denies the Lord, who turns against him, who is so proud and so willing to say, yes, I'll be with you right to the end, you can count on me. He ends up denying the Lord very explicitly and clearly, flagrant violation of their friendship. And and then it appears as though Peter was a crucial person, however, in this conversion response, that he's seen as being the leader of the group, that he is perhaps thought of as the one who gathers the group together and is a catalyst for their own faith in the resurrection of the Lord, who is an enabler of this conversion experience for the others. And perhaps it's in that he's really seen then as the foundation of the church, as the rock on which the whole community can stand. I think it's also possible that Mary Magdalene played an important role in that somehow. Again, the dynamics wouldn't be clear, but that perhaps she's one of those people who knew the forgiveness of the Lord in life and was somehow prepared by that to undergo this kind of strong conversion experience. Now, as I'm talking about all that, it's important to remember the first part of what I said. The resurrection of Jesus is not a mere subjective experience. I would not go along with Bultmann's idea that Jesus rose in the faith of the disciples. No, Jesus was raised to life. He broke through the barrier of death into a richer and greater life. He has, as Paul said, become life-giving spirit to us. That is what we believe. It's the kernel of the faith. And yet we look for ways of saying, what does that mean to us? And maybe one thing it means is that the people who were dispirited were converted into being enspirited people. And maybe that's part of what has to happen to us as we look at the resurrection of Jesus, that we have to do the 180 ourselves and begin to look at life totally differently because we are the ones who have now accepted the reality of the resurrection of Jesus. Now, if this is the case, and indeed they did undergo this conversion experience, they were faced with the problem of trying to explain this to other people. And they used two great modes of doing that. One is what we will call the appearance accounts. The appearance accounts are throughout the New Testament, after the death of Jesus. Jesus appears to Peter and to the 11. He appears to Mary Magdalene. He comes to the people on the shore and shares a meal with them. Perhaps one of the best accounts of that is the story of the disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24, where Jesus is walking along and encounters these disciples who are totally down, and they say, "Don't you know what has happened here? The one we thought was the Messiah has been crucified," and they are just totally depressed over this whole thing. And as they're going along, he explains the scriptures to them, and then they stop and share a meal together. And in the sharing of that meal, their eyes are open, and they recognize this Jesus of Nazareth, and they say, geez, when he was explaining those scriptures to us, were not our hearts on fire? And their reaction, Jesus vanishes then from their midst, and they go and want to witness to this and tell others. An example of one of the appearance accounts. Now, in the New Testament, the appearance accounts are not coherent. You can't get a clear picture. You don't know if Jesus appeared in Jerusalem first or Galilee. They appeared first to the women or to Peter. It's really, they are not consistent. So it appears we have is a number of constructed stories here in order to teach the important lesson to all the people that Jesus has been raised to life. And they are magnificent accounts, like that story in the road to Emmaus of the way that Jesus, who is still alive, can open our eyes and make our hearts burn as the Word is preached to us and we encounter Him in the Scriptures and as we share the Lord's Supper together. That's how Jesus continues to be present for us, as well as in other people who touch us in our lives. So the appearance accounts are ways in which the evangelists had of telling us of this reality. And I think they're meant to function that way, as interesting stories, as really gripping kinds of narratives that can get us immersed in the whole thing. And the second great way that they did this, tried to explain this, was in terms of the empty tomb, a tradition which probably grew up in Jerusalem, where they knew the site of the burial of Jesus and where they would have gone to gather to celebrate His continued presence. And it seems as though this story of the empty tomb, therefore, was used as one other method of being able to tell the people of the reality of the resurrection of Jesus. As many scholars say today, our faith is really not dependent on that empty tomb, but it certainly is one of the ways in which Jesus is proclaimed to us as being continually present in our lives. So, there we have the methods used to try to bring home the essential message to us. The appearance accounts, which are so magnificent, beautiful kinds of stories that touch the heart, and the empty tomb, which tries in one way or another to teach us the reality of this resurrection of the Lord. Well, I've been trying to emphasize here the meaning of all this. Easter becomes, therefore, the great feast in the whole Christian calendar. The early church, that was feast par excellence. It was the one that was at the center of their whole piety, their whole liturgical cycle. Sundays later on were seen as little Easters, as another chance to celebrate the resurrection of the Lord. They gathered to celebrate the sacred meal as a victorious meal, as a reminder of the triumph of the Lord over the powers of evil. And so it is that Easter has to become, in our own Christian piety today, the center. Easter really is more important than Christmas. Christmas is the birth of the Lord, the getting ready for it all. But Easter is what really counts. That's why in our whole liturgy today, the Easter Vigil is the most important feast of all, the great liturgical celebration of the triumph of light over darkness, of the recalling of the message of who Jesus was for us, of a call to initiate the new people into the life of the community, of people who are converted, turning their life around, the catechumens who are baptized or confirmed at the Easter Vigil, and then celebration of the Eucharist so that our eyes can be opened as the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Yeah, the resurrection is the key to the whole thing. The whole New Testament is written in the light of that resurrection of Jesus. That is the thing that galvanizes Christians together, that gives us our final hope that life makes sense. The resurrection is the good news, and indeed, if that didn't happen, we are among the most foolish of people. But it stands as the bedrock of the whole Christian faith.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was the resurrection, the key to Christian faith. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.